History and culture. Why Rome's origin myth leaves more questions than answers. The origins of Rome have been debated for centuries, but one tale has prevailed over the rest. Twin brothers Romulus and Remus, raised by a she-wolf, were destined to found the eternal city. But how did this legend come about, and is there any truth behind it? Wolfish beginnings Romulus and Remus are watched over by the she-wolf who rescued them in this 1842 painting by Charles-Émile Caillon de Champmartin. Louvre Museum, Paris. RMN Grand Palais. By Andrea Frediani. October 17, 2025. It is unusual for a city to boast a true founding event. Such occasions are rare, mostly taking place when a conqueror decides to create a city bearing his name. This was the case with Alexander the Great, who established more than 20 cities in the 4th century BC. On the other hand, Rome, much like Athens, was more likely the result of Cenoacism, the gradual aggregation of neighboring villages that, driven by the need for defense and trade, eventually coalesce into a single community under a monarchy. However, the legends of Rome's founding are far more riveting. The wisest words on the matter come from the Roman historian Livy, in the opening of his monumental Ob Urbe Condita. From the founding of the city I intend neither to affirm nor refute the legends concerning the time before the foundation of Rome or the foundation itself, for they are poetic tales rather than reliable evidence of historical events. We willingly grant the ancients the custom of ennobling the origins of their cities by blending human deeds with those of the gods. And if ever a people had the right to make sacred its origins and tie them to the divine, it is surely the Romans. The first to express skepticism about the wealth of myths surrounding Rome's birth were, in fact, the Greek and Roman historians who passed those stories down to us. These scholars lived in an era when any writer could draw on a multitude of oral legends that had sprung up to justify and glorify the power achieved by Rome over the centuries. We must begin precisely from these mythical traditions when reconstructing the history of the city's founding. By comparing the various accounts available to us, we can discern how much truth lies behind the lore that hints at a kind of civil war between two brothers Romulus and Remus, who had previously been united in a quest to bring justice to their family. Rome's River. Rome's Founders discovered in 1512 in Rome's Field of Mars. This circa 1st century sculpture is an allegory of the Tiber River, on whose banks the twins Romulus and Remus were abandoned. Louvre Museum, Paris. Scala, Florence. The earliest traces of the myth. Although it refers to events that occurred 3 centuries earlier, the story of Romulus and Remus began to circulate around the 5th century BC within Greek circles, clearly impressed by the extraordinary rise of what had, until recently, been merely an unremarkable town on the Tiber River. At the time, rumor had it that the founder was a certain Romulus, known to the Romans as Romulus. Over the following century, the two figures appeared to coexist and, in time, Romulus began to be portrayed as Romus's grandfather. After another 100 years, the transformation was complete. Romus had disappeared from legend, with the arrival of Remus, Romulus's twin brother. Greek philosopher and historian Plutarch, who lived between the 1st and 2nd centuries AD and was the author of a biography on Romulus, writes that the first person to create a cohesive narrative about Romus and his descendants was Diocles of Peparethus in the 3rd century BC. He was soon followed by a contemporary author, Quintus Fabius Pictor, whose work, the Annals, has survived only in fragments. Is this the real reason the Roman Empire collapsed? As for the existence of the twins and their tumultuous story, the oldest surviving testimony is a group of statues depicting a she-wolf suckling 2 infants. They were erected in 296 BC, during the Samnite Wars, to commemorate the appointment of 2 brothers, Quintus and Gnaeus Ogulnius Gallus, as aediles, magistrates. A gods blessing. This recreation of Rome's Capitoline Hill in the 4th century AD shows the temples that stood on the hill's summit, dominated by the central one dedicated to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Romans believed Jupiter, their chief deity, informed Romulus that the founding of Rome had his blessing. Watercolor by Jean-Claude Galvin. Musée départemental aux Antiques. Copyright Jean-Claude Galvin / Editions Arents. In short, the creation of the two figures of Romulus and Remus took place within a Greek cultural context. For this reason, references to the gods of Olympus and a legendary event of the pre-classical period, the Trojan War, was an inevitable part of their myth. During the Augustan age, several authors attempted to reconstruct the epic saga, from Marcus Terentius Varro, whose historical work Antiquitates is now entirely lost, to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, with his Roman Antiquities, of which the first 9 books survive, and, finally, to Livy, whose Ob Urbe Condita, Latin 4, from the founding of the city, originally consisted of 142 books, 35 of which have been preserved in their entirety. The first 10 volumes by the Roman historian, who lived at the turn of the 1st century, outline a coherent account of the myth surrounding Rome's founding. Varro is often credited with proposing an official date for the founding of the Urbs, or city, April 21, 753 BC, corresponding to the final face-off between Romulus and Remus. This date was calculated by attributing 35 years of reign to each of Rome's 7 kings before the Republic's establishment in 509 BC, as determined by the scholar. Other authors proposed different calculations, but Varro's chronology prevailed. Trojan ancestors. It all began with Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled the burning city with his elderly father Anchises on his shoulders and his son Ascanius, or Iulus, at his side. His escape is traced back to 1184 BC, more than 4 centuries before the myth of Romulus and Remus, but in legends time flows quickly, or not at all. When Emperor Augustus tasked the prominent poet Virgil with composing a piece celebrating the origins of the gens Julia and the Augustan restoration, the poet chronicled the wanderings of the Trojan hero, making them strikingly similar to those of Ulysses. At the end of his journey, Aeneas is said to have landed on the shores of Italy where, in the region corresponding to the area of Latium, he fought with the native peoples. He eventually made peace with them, sealed by his marriage to Lavinia, daughter to King Latinus, and by the founding of a new settlement, Lavinium. The myth continues with the exploits of Ascanius, or Iulus, whether they were the same person or the 2 sons of Aeneas, one born from Creusa in Troy and the other from Lavinia in Latium, remains unclear, who, 30 years later, is said to have founded his own city, Alba Longa, near today's Castel Gandolfo, though historians and archaeologists have never been able to pinpoint it with any certainty. Rome's other origin Story. Aeneas flees Troy with his father on his back, followed by his son, Ascanius, in G. L. Bernini's 1619 sculpture. Also known as Iulus, Ascanius was believed to be an ancestor of the Roman people, and of Julius Caesar. Galleria Borghese, Rome. G. Dagli orti/dea/album. In any case, Aeneas's son founded a long-lasting dynasty that would endure